You ever seen an animal lose all its confidence? One moment it's bold, tail high, ears up, ready to take on the world. And then in the blink of an eye, it freezes, like it just saw something that wasn't meant to exist. That's what happened to my hunting dog that morning. We were a few miles deep into the woods, just the two of us, when he stopped dead in his tracks. His nose lifted, then dropped. His whole body went stiff, tail tucked tight between his legs. At first, I thought he caught the scent of a predator, maybe a coyote or a black bear. But it wasn't that. The air was different. He wasn't tracking. He was warning. I gave a low whistle, the kind that usually snaps him back to attention. Nothing. He didn't even blink, just stood there, staring into the dark cut of the trees ahead. The woods looked ordinary, cold light filtering through the branches, a layer of frost crunching underfoot. But something about that shadow line felt wrong. I took a step forward. That's when he growled, deep, guttural, like I'd never heard from him before. Then without another sound, he backed up behind me. My dog had never done that. Not once. Not for thunder, not for gunfire, not even for bears. And the strangest part? He refused to go near that tree line again. Not that day, not ever. I didn't know it then, but that moment, that hesitation, was the start of something I still can't explain. Now, before I tell you what I found out there, you need to know what kind of dog Buck was, and what kind of woods we were walking into. It was early November, that awkward stretch between the end of fall and the start of winter. The air had that sharp bite to it, the kind that stings your nose when you breathe in too deep. I'd been hunting these woods for close to 10 years. Southeast Tennessee, mostly private land, dense hardwoods that fade into ridgelines and hollows. The kind of forest that looks calm from a distance, but once you step in, it swallows sound. You can't hear the road, can't see the sky, just the canopy closing over you like a lid. Buck and I had our routine. He'd jump out of the truck before I even turned off the ignition, nose to the dirt, tail wagging like he owned the place. He was a blue tick coonhound, 4 years old, fearless, built for these woods. That morning was supposed to be no different. I remember checking the weather. 28 degrees, light wind, no rain. Perfect for tracking. I packed light, a thermos of coffee, my rifle, and Buck's GPS collar. We headed out before sunrise, just like always. The forest road we drove in on was quiet. Frost laced the weeds along the ditch line, and every puddle had a thin sheet of ice that cracked under the tires. Buck sat upright in the passenger seat, nose twitching at every scent drifting through the cracked window. He was calm, but focused. Nothing about him hinted that the day would be different. When we reached the trailhead, I parked by an old gate, rusted, half buried in leaves. It led to the backwoods of a property once owned by a family that vanished years ago. Locals said the land was cursed, but hunters like me didn't pay much attention to stories. We only cared about tracks, scent, and wind direction. I let Buck out, stretched my legs, and poured a bit of coffee into the lid of the thermos. The air was quiet, still. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own heartbeat. And that's when it hit me. Even before we started walking, something about that silence wasn't right. I didn't realize it then, but that stillness was the first warning sign. We set out just after sunrise. The light filtered weakly through the trees. Not golden like you'd expect in the morning, but pale, washed out, almost gray. It didn't warm the ground. Everything still looked frozen, quiet. Buck trotted ahead, nose low to the dirt, tail swinging steady. For the first half mile, he was himself again, confident, curious, stopping here and there to sniff at fresh tracks. I followed the old logging path. It had probably been abandoned 30 years ago, overgrown now with tall grass and thorn bush. The forest on either side was dense. Oak, hickory, and a few cedars clumped so tight the light barely made it through. Every sound felt trapped between the trees. Then, about 20 minutes in, I noticed the first strange thing. No birds. Usually, the woods wake up fast once the sun hits. You hear woodpeckers, squirrels rustling leaves, the occasional crow. But this time, nothing. Just our footsteps and the distant creak of the wind against bare branches. Buck stopped again, head up, ears twitching, scanning the tree line. I froze, listening with him. Nothing moved. No sound, no breeze. Just silence pressing down like a weight. I called softly, "What is it, boy?" He didn't bark, didn't growl. He just stared, the hair on his neck standing up. I figured maybe he caught scent of a deer or a stray coyote, so I unhooked his leash to let him roam. He didn't move. He just looked at me like he was waiting for something, or warning me about something I couldn't see. I took a few steps forward down the path, crunching through frozen leaves. Still nothing. No movement. Not even the usual smell of pine or earth. Just cold air and that strange, still quiet. Then Buck made a low sound in his throat, half whine, half growl, and backed up until his tail brushed my leg. I crouched, rubbing his head to calm him, and that's when I realized something else. The forest didn't just sound empty. It felt empty. You spend enough time outdoors, and you learn to sense when a place is alive. The woods hum. You can almost feel it in your chest. But here, it was like everything had stopped breathing. I checked the GPS. We were near a part of the ridge I hadn't explored much. Locals called it Deer Hollow, though nobody could remember why. It wasn't even marked on most maps anymore. Just a sloped valley with fog that never seemed to lift. That's where Buck refused to go any further. He started pacing, low to the ground, nose close to the dirt but not tracking. It was like he was looking for a way around. Any direction except forward. His tail stayed tucked. I'd seen him face bears before, but never act like that. I tried to coax him, clapped my hands, snapped my fingers, called his name. Nothing worked. His paws dug into the soil, body trembling. That's when I caught it too. A faint smell drifting in the air. Metallic, damp, almost like rust and wet fur mixed together. I turned toward the ridge, squinting into the trees. The light there looked different, darker somehow, even though the sun was up, like the forest swallowed the daylight whole. Buck stopped so suddenly his leash slipped right out of my hand. He planted his paws into the dirt and let out a sound I'd never heard from him before. Not quite a growl, not quite a whine. It was low, drawn out, almost pleading. I crouched beside him, trying to see what he saw. His gaze didn't move. It was fixed straight ahead, on the shadowed gap between two oaks about 2 yards up. "Go on, boy," I whispered, tapping my leg like I always did when it was time to move forward. Nothing. He didn't even flinch. Just stood there, chest heaving, eyes wide, tail tucked tight against his belly. Then, for the first time in all the years I'd hunted with him, he backed up. Slow, deliberate steps, until his shoulder brushed against my knee. His whole body was trembling. I followed his stare toward the gap. At first, it looked normal. Trees, brush, old leaves scattered over frozen ground. But the longer I looked, the less sense it made. The trees weren't swaying. Not even a branch moved, though I could feel wind hitting my face. The air beyond that gap, it was still. Too still. I took one cautious step forward. Buck let out a sharp bark, one, then another, and pulled back hard on the leash, nearly knocking me off balance. I turned, half irritated, half startled. He was shaking so bad I could hear the metal tag on his collar rattling. "What's wrong with you, boy?" I said under my breath. He just stared at that opening, tail down, ears flattened. That's when I caught it. A faint sound coming from the tree line. Not loud, not even distinct. It was like something shifting weight, slow and heavy on the other side of the trees. I couldn't see movement, but I could feel it. You know how sometimes your mind just tells you something's there? I tried to convince myself it was a deer, maybe even an elk moving through thick brush. But then the smell hit. Strong, metallic, and wrong. Like iron left in the rain mixed with wet earth. The kind of smell that doesn't belong in cold air. I raised my flashlight, more out of instinct than curiosity, and aimed it at the gap. The beam cut through the fog, slicing the shadows in half, and for a split second, I could have sworn I saw the outline of something standing there. Not moving, not breathing, just there. I blinked, refocused the light. Nothing. The space was empty. Buck whimpered and bolted behind me, pressing his body into my leg. He wouldn't stop shaking. That was the first time I felt it too. Not fear exactly, but pressure. Like the air itself was heavier, thicker. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. The woods didn't just feel quiet anymore. They felt like they were listening. You ever notice how animals seem to know something we don't? Like they can sense a presence long before we even feel the air change? That's exactly what I learned, the hard way. It was supposed to be a simple hunting trip. Nothing fancy, just me, my rifle, and my dog Boone. He's a 4-year-old blue tick coonhound, brave, loyal, and never one to hesitate when the woods called. But that morning, something was off. The first thing I noticed was how still everything was. No wind through the pines, no bird song, just that heavy kind of silence that feels wrong, like the world's holding its breath. I remember checking my watch. 6:14 a.m. The sun was just starting to bleed through the tree line, painting everything in that cold orange light. Boone was pacing by the truck, ears pinned back, tail low. He wouldn't look at me, just stared toward the woods like something was waiting in there. I laughed it off at first, thought maybe he caught scent of a coyote. But when I opened the tailgate and told him to go, he refused. Not hesitated, refused. He growled, low and steady, and backed up until his paws hit gravel. That's when I knew something was different about those woods. There's a moment, right before you do something you know you shouldn't, where your gut tells you to stop. I ignored mine that day, and I swear, if I had just listened to my dog, I might have never seen what was waiting out there. Because Boone, he wasn't scared of what was in the woods. He was scared of who used to be. I've been hunting since I was old enough to carry a .22 under supervision. My dad was the kind of man who believed the woods could teach you more than any classroom ever could. Patience, discipline, and respect for silence. He used to say, "The forest doesn't lie. It just waits for you to listen." When he passed, I kept that lesson close. Hunting wasn't about trophies for me anymore. It became a way to stay connected to him. And Boone? Boone was part of that connection. I raised him from a pup, trained him to track and point like my dad taught me. He wasn't just a hunting dog, he was family. We'd been through thick fog, snowstorms, nights so cold the rifle metal burned to touch, but he'd never once refused to go in. That weekend, I'd planned to scout a new area, an old stretch of forest about 15 miles out from the nearest town, near a place locals called Hollow's Bend. The name sounded harmless enough, but the people who lived around there didn't talk about it much. Every time I mentioned it, they just said, "Stay near the old trail, don't go too deep." I figured it was just small town superstition, stories passed down to keep kids from wandering off. I remember the drive that morning clear as day. Long stretches of cracked asphalt, frost along the edges of the windshield, and that quiet country radio static humming under the engine noise. Boone had his head out the window the whole way there, wheel there, ears flapping, tongue hanging out. He looked happy then, completely normal. But the second we pulled up to that old forest gate, something changed. His body went stiff, tail lowered, and he gave this low rumble of a growl I'd never heard from him before. It wasn't a bark, it was a warning. And right there, standing at the tree line, was a sign. Weathered wood, almost split in two, the words carved into it barely legible anymore. Private land, do not enter. But below it, scratched in with what looked like a nail, were new letters, uneven, shaky. Not safe after dark. I should have turned around right then. But I left Boone by the truck, figuring he'd settle down once he saw I wasn't spooked. Usually if I take the lead, he follows. But that day he just sat there, eyes locked on the tree line, whining low in his throat. I remember slinging my rifle over my shoulder, stepping past the gate, and feeling the air change almost instantly. The cold wasn't natural. It was that kind of chill that sinks into your bones even when the sun's out. The ground was thick with pine needles, soft enough that my boots barely made a sound. Every few steps, I'd stop and listen. No birds, no bugs, no wind through the branches. Just silence. And the strangest part? It wasn't the quiet itself. It was the fact that I could hear the quiet. Like my ears were straining for something that wasn't there. I hiked maybe half a mile in before I started noticing things. Tiny details that didn't add up. A tree line cut clean at shoulder height, as if something large had snapped through several saplings at once. No tracks. No scat. No broken branches higher up. Just a wide path, as if something had walked through there and never looked back. At one point, I found a deer carcass, or what was left of it. I've seen kills before, clean and messy alike, but this one, it didn't make sense. The ribs were bent outward, not inward, looking like something had forced its way out. There were no bite marks, no sign of struggle in the leaves. Just that body, lying still in the dirt, steam rising faintly in the morning chill. That's when the smell hit me. Iron and wet bark, mixed with something wrong, almost sweet. Rotten, but faint. Like it wasn't coming from the carcass at all. I remember whispering Boone's name under my breath, half expecting him to appear at my side like always. But when I looked back through the trees, I could barely see the truck anymore. Just a sliver of silver through the brush. For a second, I thought I heard breathing. I didn't stay long that first day. After finding that deer carcass, I told myself it was probably coyotes, even though the wounds didn't fit. By noon, I was back at the truck. Boone hadn't moved an inch. He didn't even bark when I opened the door, just stared at me, trembling. When I reached out to pet him, he flinched. That's when I noticed it. A faint smell on my clothes. That same sweet rot from the woods. Boone backed away and whined like I was something he didn't recognize. That night, we slept in the truck, parked beside the old forest road. I figured morning would clear my head. But at sunrise, I woke to the sound of scratching. At first, I thought it was Boone pawing at the door, but he was still curled beside me, eyes wide open, tail tucked under. The sound was coming from the outside, along the metal near the rear of the truck. Slow, deliberate scratches, like something dragging a nail across the paint. I sat there, frozen, listening. It went on for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. When I finally worked up the nerve to look, there was nothing out there. Except, on the tailgate, there were marks. 5 deep lines, uneven and jagged, and between them, faint smears of something dark. Not paint, not dirt. Blood. Boone started barking then. Not his usual bark, but that panicked primal sound a dog makes when it's cornered. I slammed the truck door shut and gunned the engine, gravel spitting out behind us as we tore down that road. We didn't stop until we hit the old ranger station 10 miles out. The ranger on duty, an older guy, maybe in his 60s, took one look at Boone and asked where I'd been. When I told him Hollow's Bend, he went quiet. Didn't write anything down. Didn't ask about the blood. Just said, "If you're smart, you'll stay out of there. That place isn't on our patrol anymore." I asked him why. He just stared at the forest behind me and said, "Because the woods remember. And sometimes they call back what doesn't belong." I didn't understand what he meant then. Not until the next night. Because something followed us back to camp. That night, we set up camp a few miles from town. Figured some distance would help calm Boone down. The air was clear, stars sharp as pins overhead. Everything felt almost normal again. But Boone never relaxed. He sat at the edge of the firelight, facing the woods, every muscle tight. His ears twitched at sounds I couldn't hear, and every few minutes, he'd give a low growl, like a warning meant for something beyond the dark. Around midnight, the fire started dying down. I leaned back in my chair, half asleep, when Boone let out this sound I've never heard from him before. Half bark, half scream. He lunged towards the trees, leash snapping tight, teeth bared. Then I heard it. A snap. Not like a branch breaking under weight. Heavier. Followed by breathing. Slow, uneven, and close. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the tree line. That's when I saw them. Eyes. Not animal eyes. Too far apart, too high off the ground. The light caught them for just a second, dull amber, reflecting back with that oily shimmer you see in deer. But these didn't blink. Boone was losing it, barking like mad, pulling so hard the leash dug into my hand. I called out, not sure why, just instinct, and the second I did, the breathing stopped. Everything went quiet again. Even Boone froze. His ears went flat, tail tucked. He whimpered once and tried to back away, but his gaze was locked. not on the eyes, but slightly below them. I followed his stare. There, between the trees, was a figure. Tall, still, too still. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I tried to get a clearer look. Pale skin, bare shoulders, and something hanging off it. Fur. Patches of fur. It looked like it had stitched animal hides over itself. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then it tilted its head, a slow, unnatural motion, like it was studying us. Boone broke first. He lunged forward, leash snapping, charging straight into the dark. I yelled after him, light swinging wildly through the trees, and in that flicker of movement, I saw the figure drop to all fours and vanish. Not ran, dropped. The next thing I heard was Boone yelping, loud and sharp, then silence. I fired into the dark, 1, 2, 3 rounds, the echoes swallowed by the forest. When I found him, maybe 30 yards in, he was shaking, still alive but torn up bad. No bite marks, no claw marks, just long, clean slashes, like from something that didn't need claws to cut. I carried him back to the truck, heart pounding, flashlight shaking in my hand. Behind me, just as I reached the road, I heard it. The sound of something walking parallel through the trees. Not running, just following, step for step. I don't even remember starting the engine, just the sound of gravel spraying under the tires as I tore down that dirt road with Boone in the back seat, bleeding onto the blanket. Every few seconds, I'd glance in the mirror, expecting to see headlights, or eyes, or something following us. The forest felt endless. No matter how far I drove, the trees just kept swallowing the road ahead. Black, endless rows flickering in the high beams. The radio was off, but I swear I could still hear whispering, like voices buried under the wind. It wasn't words exactly, more like someone trying to mimic them. Boone whimpered once, lifting his head weakly toward the window. And that's when I smelled it again. That faint, sickly sweet rot, stronger than before. It wasn't coming from him, it was coming from outside. Something moved across the road up ahead, fast, low, and wrong. I hit the brakes hard. The headlights caught it for a split second, a shape too long to be human, crawling on all fours, but moving like it was deciding whether to stand. Then it was gone. I floored it, not caring if the truck fishtailed. Branches whipped against the sides, dirt kicked up behind us. Every turn, every shadow looked alive. The speedometer hit 70, then 80, and still that feeling pressed in, like something was keeping pace just beyond the lights. When we finally burst out of the tree line onto the highway, I didn't stop. Not when the forest disappeared in the mirror. Not when Boone stopped whining and just went limp against the seat. Not until I reached town. Lights, people, anything that wasn't trees. I pulled into a gas station, stumbled out shaking, hands still locked on the steering wheel like they were frozen there. When I looked at the truck, my stomach dropped. They were handprints on the back window. Not smudges, prints. Long, narrow fingers pressed into the glass from the outside, and smeared downward like someone had tried to climb on. And through the dirt on the tailgate, I could still see those 5 jagged scratches from the night before, but fresh now, wider, deeper. I stood there until the clerk came out and asked if I was okay. I told him I hit a deer. He looked at the marks and said, "That wasn't no deer."